You've seen the monster, but do you really know the boy? We know him as Vecna, the nightmare from the Upside Down. But the story we got in Season 4 was just the beginning. Before the monster, he was Henry Creel, and his evil was made, not born. The story begins not in Hawkins, but in a desolate Nevada cave, where an encounter with an entity from another dimension, the Mind Flayer, didn't just give Henry powers, it infected him. This is the real story of how a sensitive kid became the vessel for an ancient evil, and how that dark influence twisted him into slaughtering his own family. The Nevada incident. Our story begins in Rachel, Nevada. From a young age, Henry Creel felt like an outsider who saw the world as a broken system. This resentment found a catalyst when he explored a cave near his home and discovered a fragment of what we now know as the Mind Flayer. An accident tore a hole in reality, pulling Henry into a terrifying place called Dimension X. When he returned, he wasn't the same. The encounter imbued him with psychic abilities, but more importantly, the Mind Flayer had latched onto him, planting a seed of its consciousness in his mind. It became a dark passenger. Fearing what was happening to their son, the Creels fled to a new house in Hawkins, desperate for a fresh start. They didn't know they had brought the monster with them. A predator in the attic, a monster in the mind. In the attic of their new Hawkins home, Henry found a nest of black widow spiders. He saw them as kindred spirits, solitary predators imposing order on a flawed world. This solidified his own dark philosophy. He wasn't just admiring them, he was practicing. He secretly honed the terrifying powers granted to him by the Mind Flayer, starting small by killing animals. But this was more than a boy testing his limits. This was Henry, under the Mind Flayer's influence, learning to become a predator. He realized he could invade the minds of others, feasting on their fears and traumas with a cosmic evil whispering in his ear. The haunting of Creel House. With his powers growing, Henry turned on his own family. The events his father, Victor, later described as a demonic haunting were actually the calculated work of his son. Flickering lights, dead animals, and waking nightmares became their new reality. Henry projected visions tailored to their deepest traumas. He forced his father, a World War II veteran, to relive battle horrors and tormented his mother with visions of spiders. While Victor believed a demon had followed them, his wife, Virginia, suspected a more horrifying truth. She looked at her quiet son and somehow knew he was the source of their torment. The monster wasn't in the walls, it was her own child. A mother's betrayal. Virginia's realization was a fatal turning point. Terrified of her son, she made a drastic choice. She contacted Dr. Martin Brenner, a scientist interested in children like Henry, and planned to turn her son over to him. She made one critical mistake. She underestimated her son's power. Henry, using his telepathy, heard her entire plan. To the boy who already felt alienated, this was the ultimate betrayal. To the Mind Flayer, it was the perfect opportunity. It twisted Henry's hurt into pure rage, solidifying his belief that humanity, including his own family, was a plague that needed to be eradicated. The first murders. The night of the murders was an act of unimaginable cruelty. As music played on the radio, Henry, now fully in sync with the Mind Flayer, unleashed his power. He started with his mother and sister, trapping them in torturous hallucinations before grotesquely breaking their bodies and taking their eyes. His father, Victor, was meant to be the final victim, but the sound of Ella Fitzgerald's "Dream a Little Dream of Me" acted as an anchor to reality, giving Victor a lifeline Henry's power couldn't sever. Henry, still just a boy, overextended himself and collapsed into a coma. Victor was left alive, framed for the murders, and locked away. The birth of number 1. When Henry awoke, he was in the custody of Dr. Brenner. Brenner faked the boy's death and brought him to Hawkins National Laboratory. Henry Creel ceased to exist. He was stripped of his name and became Subject 001. To control him, Brenner implanted a device called Soteria in Henry's neck, suppressing his powers and turning him into an orderly. For years, Henry watched as Brenner tried, and failed, to recreate his abilities in other children. This imprisonment only refined his hatred, fed by the Mind Flayer's influence, that the world needed to be burned down and remade. From murder to apocalypse. The slaughter of his family was the first act of a philosophy that wasn't entirely his own. It was a mission statement, born from Henry's misanthropy and powered by the Mind Flayer's nihilism. Years later, when a young 11 freed him, he unleashed that same rage on the lab. When she banished him into another dimension, he was torn apart and remade into Vecna. But this wasn't a transformation. It was a reunion. There, He fully merged with the Mind Flayer he encountered as a child. It's a terrifying symbiosis where it's unclear who is the master and who is the puppet. The monster we see is both Henry and the Mind Flayer, now one. So, why did Vecna murder his own family? The answer is a perfect storm. A boy's hatred for the world, a parasitic entity from another dimension, and the discovery of powers he couldn't control. The final catalyst was his mother's betrayal, which the Mind Flayer used to turn a troubled boy into a willing murderer. The Creel family massacre wasn't just familicide, it was a declaration of war. It was the moment Henry Creel truly became one with a monster and began his work to tear down our world and remake it in his own horrifying vision. Stranger Things hides some of the darkest secrets in plain sight, and this was just one of them. If you love deep theories, hidden lore, and stories that change how you see your favorite shows, subscribe to Qbrains right now, because the next secret we uncover might completely change the way you see the Upside Down.